chocolate. There's knobs on it. Can it get any louder? Oh, now you can hear it. Hello, party people. Welcome. Welcome to Solidarity on Tap at the Ignatian Family Teach-In for Justice. Whoa, this is interesting. And I'm standing right in front of the live stream, so I'm just going to sit here. My name is Lena Chapin. I am the Director of Networking and Development at the Ignatian Solidarity Network, and I am so excited to welcome you both in person and virtually on our live stream to the first ever Solidarity on Tap at the Ignatian Family Teach-In for Justice. Yeah, woo, give it up. This is exciting. Let's hear you. It has been a heck of a past couple of years, year and a half. And I, for one, am just feeling so blessed and happy and elated, honestly, to be in the presence of so many wonderful people and to have this opportunity to introduce these wonderful women behind me and have you listen to their banter and their joy and their wisdom. So I'm going to first start off with thank you for coming. As an Ignatian family, not just Jesuit, I want to lift up all of the people in here. And so in doing that, I want to do a little roll call. Who here is here representing or has family members in a Jesuit and or Greater Catholic high school? Woo! Lift them up, shout them out. Which ones? Gonzaga? Loyola? I see St. Peter's. Oh my gosh, I'm gonna give myself away. I'm not gonna do that. Any colleges? Yell them out. USF, Loyola. Georgetown. Yeah, guys, don't be shy. This is the first time we've been together. Get excited. Any current JVs in the house? Woo, big thank you to all of the JVs for their help this weekend at IFTJ. Any former JVs in the house? Woo, awesome. Thank you for being here. And yeah, awesome. Any Jesuit parish members? Which ones? Yeah. Awesome. Wait, which cities for JVC? New Orleans, nice. Detroit.
Atlanta.
Ooh, Atlanta.
San Francisco.
San Fran. Beautiful. Awesome. Any Jesuits in the house? Hey! Awesome. And any other vowed religious in the house? Oh yeah. Hey. Way to rep. Awesome. Any other institutions represented? This is your time. Shout it out. No. Oh, Richmond Diocese. Thank you for being here. That's a way to lead the way. And also the Ignatian Solidarity Network. We're repping ourselves here tonight. So let me introduce these fine ladies behind me. I feel so awkward just sitting here, but we're live streaming to a lot of people and I don't want them to see my bottom. So this to my right is Teresa Marie Carino Peterson. She is a big nerd who loves reading, knitting, listening to music, and dismantling systems of oppression. She currently serves as an educator at Sacred Heart Prep in Atherton, California, where she teaches in the Religious Studies Department and coordinates the immersion program in the Campus Ministry Department. Prior to her work at Sacred Heart, Teresa spent nearly a decade in parish ministry in both New York and California. Her heart and work has focused on forming communities and journeying with others to expand their faith and making it inseparable from justice. Yeah, it's all right. She is currently embarking on a new journey in which she is calling embodied spiritual repair. So look it up as soon as it has a website.
Well, there's a session on it.
There's a session on it, so you know if you're registered for the teach-in, you can learn more. Whew. Teresa also serves on the board of the National Catholic Reporter, which will come into importance very soon. To my left is our featured speaker of the evening, Miss Olga Segura, is a freelance writer and the opinion editor at the National Catholic Reporter. She is the author of Birth of a Movement, Black Lives Matter in the Catholic Church, which has been published and is available for sale right here and at the store. So feel free to get your copy signed tonight, friends. It's also available online at where your local book realty is. What?
Bookstore.
Bookstore, that's the word. It's fine. Previously, she was an associate editor at American Media, where she wrote and solicited articles on race and culture. She is a co-founder and former co-host of the podcast Jesuitical, which is available wherever podcasts are found, wherever you get your podcasts. Her writing has appeared in The Guardian, Latino Rebels, Shondaland, Sojourners, Refinery 29, and The Revealer. Prior to working at America, Olga was an intern at the Permanent Mission of the Dominican Republic in the United Nations. She graduated from Fordham University with a Bachelor of Arts in English and a Bachelor of Arts in Italian Language and Literature. She speaks Italian and Spanish fluently and was born in Santo Domingo, Dominican Republic. That is pretty darn awesome. So give a big round of applause for these wonderful women. I'm going to turn it over to them. Let's have some fun tonight, friends.
Lena said, we're going to have some fun tonight.
Talking to it real loud.
Talking.
Oh, no, it's out.
Oh, no. It was my water bottle.
It was your water bottle.
Try it again.
Hello? No.
Hello. There you go.
Is it working?
No. Here, let me see it.
Hello? 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 Do you want me to project?
Project. It sounds like it's working, like it's making
Hello?
All
it.
right. I won't mess it up. Thank you. Lena said we're going to have some fun tonight, so there's nothing more fun I'd like to talk about than racism in the Catholic Church. So Olga, I'm really glad to be here with you. Aside from considering you a friend, I am also a huge fangirl and love your work. I've been thinking a lot about justice and where that comes from, and thinking about the impetus to do the work really starts from who we are. And what I really loved about your book is that you kind of weave in your narrative throughout. So I wanted to know, what is it about you, about your experiences, about your life that really prompted you to do this research?
Thank you, Teresa. That's a wonderful question. And I just want to say I'm really excited to be in community with you again today. Teresa was one of the first people I got to do a virtual event with, I think around my book's publication. So it's nice that we get to do
Literally
this
your
in
book's
person, right?
publication.
So I'm glad we get to have fun and talk about oppression together. So for me, I was really called to focus on this movement because I was at a point in my life when I was in my mid-20s. I was working at a predominantly white Jesuit Catholic magazine. I had gone from a predominantly white Jesuit institution, so I went to America, and I was having a kind of spiritual crisis where I was like, okay, if this is the Catholicism that is the Catholicism of the United States, this is not the faith that I grew up in. This is not the faith of my mother. This is not the faith of the women in my family. And so I felt really lost, and I felt like I was going to leave the church. And I thought to myself, okay, well, if you're not finding stories that represent your experience, that represent the experience of other women like me, and women from my family, from my community in the Bronx, from the Dominican Republic, then find those stories, right? I thought that I was going to, or not that I thought, I wanted to create a space where women and Catholics like me could feel that the church was their home, because it is our home. We're a part of this community, we're a part of this church, and the Black Lives Matter movement really helped me in my reporting, especially the early reporting I did on it, really kept me in the church, because it showed me that the issue was not with the faith of the Black women in my life. It wasn't with the faith of the Black and brown, indigenous, etc. folks from my community and from all across the United States. the issue was with the church that was really unwilling to completely grapple with the whiteness problem that exists in the U.S. church. And so I began reporting on this movement as a way to first keep myself in this church and to remind myself that even if you're not necessarily seeing examples of the gospel in the church Catholic community in which you're in, Jesus calls us to look for those faces outside. And so these women really taught me to think about things like the resurrection. They taught me to think about what it means to go to the margins and what it means to actually say, hey, I should not be allowed to live a privileged life if anyone is suffering. Right. And these are the teachings of our church, right? This is Catholic social teaching. So these women really helped me to internalize that, and they helped me be theological in a way that I never was before. And then once that helped me, like we mentioned the word embodied, I really felt like they made me feel like I belonged. They made me feel like I belonged in this church, like I belonged in the spaces I was in. And then I wanted to make sure other people felt the same. And so for me, like my work became very much focused on helping other Catholics understand this movement.
Yeah, I think that's incredible. There's so much to unpack there, and I think we will throughout the course of the evening. But something that you highlight is that there's a difference between the faith of your mother and the faith of the women around you, and kind of what I would highlight and say the institutional Catholic Church. So for those of you who love to follow church politics, I'm sure everyone here, subscribe to NCR. Archbishop Gomez, who is the president of the United States Conference of Catholic Bishops, arguably the most powerful man in the Catholic Church in North America, recently came out with a fun little statement in which I'm going to look up some of the things I highlighted about it. It's interesting. I'm going to preface this. There was recently a meeting of popular movements in which Pope Francis addressed and really kind of called out a lot of economic injustices. And it was beautiful. He started off calling them dear social poets. This is not what Archbishop Gomez started with. He said that he, first of all, denounced social justice movements. He called them pseudo religions. I think this is me messing up the mic. Here. No. It's Gomez. We're watching.
It's long enough too. All right, cool.
Probably been excommunicated. That's what happens. So he said he denounced social movements that promoted social justice, wokeness, and intersectionality. So yeah, quite a different message that happens within our church, and quite a different message that you explore in your book. And part of your research and what you highlighted is that Black Lives Matter and other social movements, like the Me Too movement, have a lot that they could teach the Catholic Church. I think in the book you said that Black Lives Matter can teach, or like has a culture of discernment and introspection. So I'm wondering, what did you find from these movements that could apply to the Catholic Church? And your response to what Bishop Gomez was saying.
Thank you for that. If you follow me on Twitter, you know I have a lot of responses to the bishops often, but I'm glad to be able to talk about it in front of other people. So I'll kind of answer that, those two questions sort of wrapped up into each other. So I'll start with Gomez's, I'll start with what these movements can teach us. And I'll borrow some of the language that Gomez actually used in his really problematic statement. I don't know if it was a lecture or just the words he published at the National Catholic Register, but this is a movement. First, we're talking about movements. We're not just talking about movements that have no names, right? We're not talking about movements that don't have leaders, that don't have organizers. We're talking about movements that were started by Black women. These are movements that are started by Black women and that our church continues to deliberately ignore because they are misogynist. And we're talking about specifically misogynoir, right? We're talking about the perception that a lot of men in our church in particular have to movements that empower Black women, that empower women of color to do Christ-like work. And I think this is the number one reason we keep seeing bishops and other people in our church make these comments. There's really this inability to actually center spaces where it's Black women who are doing this work and Black women who are showing us actually what it means to be in community with each other and to have human dignity. And these movements, especially the Me Too movement, especially the work of Tarana Burke, these are movements that actually help us to be better witnesses. These are movements that are helping us to actually care about what it means to believe that you are pro-life. These are movements that are showing you what it actually means to care about human life, to care about whether or not people have food to eat, whether or not people have shelter, whether or not people are incarcerated. And these movements are helping, especially young Catholics, especially young people in general who feel very lost because there are so many socioeconomic crises happening all at once. These are movements that are empowering millennials and younger to say, hey, I have been ignored in whatever space I'm in. I have been ignored in this church for such a long time, but I have the right to demand that you hear me. I have the right to use whatever tools are at my disposal, whatever skill set I have to fight for liberation. And they've really given young people in this country the language to talk about these things. Like the reason that I can talk about imperialism, the reason I can talk about capitalism, the reason I can talk about immigration, systemic oppression, is because these movements gave me that language at a time when my church wasn't giving me that language. This movement gave me the rhetoric to do that. And this is why they're so important. This is why it's so important for people to take it seriously, because our church leadership is not doing this work. The USCCB as a whole is not doing this work. But why not actually enter into this dialogue with the people who are doing this work? And I think there's a lot of unwillingness to release power. There's a lot of unwillingness for people in our church to release power. And there's a lot of unwillingness to center Black people. And that is most of the resistance that I hear coming from men in our church is rooted in the misogyny that they have against Black women who have power and who are working to build this power.
Yeah. I don't know how to follow that. It's like we can end the conversation there. Yeah, sums it up, guys. Yeah, I sent Olga my questions ahead of time, but I'm gonna jump around. What you mentioned, going back again to like being embodied and like having our life experiences like move us to seek questions and answers and challenge authority. I love that you really uplift and center the voices and the experiences and the power that Black women have. You know, you mentioned in your book that the USCCB put together this committee to look at race and racism, and they published this letter called Open Wide Our Hearts, and your minds, and maybe your pocketbook. And within that, they did not talk about the Black Lives Matter movement. They did not name Alicia Garza, Patrisse Cullors, Opal Tometi. They really silenced these women who are doing this important work that brought this national conversation to a point where the bishops had to respond, right? You know, even if the response was less than adequate, they felt like they had to respond. So I'm wondering, one, if you could talk about their influence in your life and in your work. I know you've had conversations with Alicia Garza, and then also Tarana Burke, who started the Me Too movement. And yeah, so if you could talk about their work, but also talk a little bit about Tarana Burke and who she is and how her name kind of came about.
Yeah, so starting with the Black Lives Matter movement, this is a movement that was started by the three women you mentioned, Garza, Tometi, and Cullors, and these are three women who have been organizing for many, many years. These are women who have been organizing for over 10, 15 years. I could be getting those numbers wrong, around housing rights, immigration rights, reproductive justice, a lot of the issues that many people in this room are concerned with. And they really helped me, or Alex, say who Tarana Burke is, and then I'll collectively discuss how they've helped me. And then Tarana Burke is the founder of the Me Too movement, and I talked to her about her work, I think in 2018, 2019, and during our conversation, she talked about her own trauma and her own experience as a survivor of sexual assault, and she talked specifically about how Catholicism was like a complete lifeline for her in this moment, and she was raised in a very interfaith home. She had relatives who were Muslim, and she herself was kind of allowed to learn about different faiths, and she was Catholic growing up, and she's still Christian, but she's no longer Catholic. And she talked about the role that Catholicism played in her life at a really dark moment, where she was questioning the violence that had happened to her, and she was questioning her identity as a young woman that she had. She was a child when this happened to her, and she talked about how Catholicism really gave her the tools to overcome, or not overcome, but to grapple with what had happened to her, but to also understand that no matter what work she's doing it in the name of Jesus. Right. And she is a servant leader, and everything that she does is to make the world more Christ-like. And she founded this movement, I think, in the early odds. My time is all over the place, so I could be getting dates wrong. But she founded this movement before it went viral in 2017 or 2018. So she's been doing this work for years. Like the women of the Black Lives Matter movement, these are women who have been doing this work for years before they went viral and before people really learned their names. And being able to really, really sit with the conversations I'd had and to really understand the work that they were doing, that really was the moment where I made the decision to really say, oh, no, I'm going to stay in this church. And I'm going to stay in this church. And I'm going to work to make the church not based on what these men are telling me this church is supposed to be, but based on what these women are showing me through their witness, right? Because there's something powerful to talk to someone who's experienced one of the worst things that can happen to anyone, and to say, even in spite of that, I am still promoting the gospel. Right. Even in spite of that, I'm still fighting. I'm still fighting for human life. And to me, that is Christianity. And these women taught me how to be Catholic. They really, really just taught me how to be a better Catholic.
Yeah. And that's excellent. I just love everything you say. But yeah, I loved your book because I read it and I was like, she calls out the bishops, like going hard, like really calls them out. And then two, I read it and I put it down and I was like, I feel empowered. You know, I really felt a sense that going back to your initial answer, how we started this conversation, that this isn't just the church of old white men in power, or old men in power. This is a church that we can stay a part of and that we can fight for, and we could make our own and look like ourselves. You know, we are made in the image and likeness of God, and we are building our own tables, really. So as you've continued your journalistic work, and in your personal life, where have you seen spaces that Catholic or people of faith inhabit, where they're utilizing their agency and taking their power, and defining what it means for them to be, to live out the gospel?
Yeah, I think that's a really, really important question. And I love when I get this, because I think it can be very easy to focus on the bishops and all of the awful things that are happening in our church. But there's also been a lot of hopeful things that have happened with Catholics, especially after the murder of George Floyd. Last summer, I saw so many Catholics, and this is specifically a lot of the Catholics that I follow on a variety of social networks, but seeing how people were just empowered enough to say, you know what? I'm going to raise funds for folks. I'm going to support people who are on the ground. If I don't feel comfortable enough marching in a pandemic, then I'm going to spread the word using my platform. I'm going to send resources. I'm going to send books. I'm going to make calls, whatever it is that I need to do. And seeing that, and that is a lot at the grassroots level. We've seen a lot of lay Catholics who are doing that work. We've seen a lot of individual religious leaders who have called out, who have aligned themselves with the Black Lives Matter movement, and who have supported it, and who have attended marches in the past year. But I think one of the things that has been most inspiring for me is just people who are taking how you describe the power that they're getting, the empowerment that they're feeling, and really just helping other people to start doing this work. Because I think that's a part of the organizing that we're called to do as Catholics, right? There's the organizing that we do in these spaces when we have these conversations and in our respective lives, but there's also the organizing in intimate spaces. I know a lot of people, a lot of Catholics who I follow in the Bronx where I'm from, a lot of them are doing really great work around land liberation and educating people about the green spaces in which they live and what it means to have a better relationship to the world, what it means to have a better relationship to the food that you're eating, the food that you're sharing. And those are moments in the past year that I have been extremely, extremely inspired. I think people who are taking things like my book and who are saying, okay, I feel empowered, let me help my family start to organize. Let me help my family start to talk about trauma. Let me have my family start to talk about what it means to organize, because I think it's okay to feel overwhelmed right now, and it's okay to feel as if you don't know what to do. But I think when people, especially Catholics, because we have so many tools at our resource, when I've seen Catholic intimate groups get together in the past year, that's when I've been like the most inspired, because I think that the work starts in those spaces, right? We have to empower each other to say like, hey, it's scary to go out and do that work. It's scary to fight for liberation, but it's actually scarier not to fight for liberation, because even if your day-to-day is not being affected, you're still living under an oppressive system that is hurting other people. So I think Catholics who I've seen, and non-Catholics alike, who I've seen engaging in that type of intimate organizing, whether that's a Zoom book club, whether that's meeting at a parish and just talking about what it means to say that Black Lives Matter, I think those are some of the best examples I've seen in the past year.
Yeah, that is where change happens, right? I was just thinking about how we first met. We met at a teach-in, as all good love stories go. And we just started texting because we were just talking about what it means to be a woman of color in the church. And I think that's how we started our friendship. So yeah, happening in intimate spaces and questioning like, who are we reaching out to and building those friendships with? This is a community. We're all in community together. We're all part of the Ignatian network. So I actually want to open it up to any questions or comments people have to bring this conversation to a wider audience, if that's okay.
Yeah, of course.
So just raise your hand and I'll call on you, I think. Yeah.
We are starting after George Floyd's murder. We in our parish on Staten Island. Staten Island.
Yeah.
You're from New York.
Yeah, I know what you mean when you
Island.
say Staten Island.
I love Staten Island, but there's Staten Island. So we started it. We had the first year where we read like crazy. And were horrified. I thought I knew a lot. I have a Black daughter-in-law and grandkids that are mixed. But the problem we have in taking it back to our parish is that everybody thinks they're not prejudiced. Everyone says, I treat everyone the same way, and they do. They do. We can see it with families coming. They know nothing about systemic racism. So some of the people you were just talking about now, they're good-hearted people, but they don't know. So how do we start to be able to get butts in the seat so they can learn some things that will open their hearts more? Because I have no question in my mind that these are loving, good people. But our pastor had to deal with one parishioner who said he would leave the parish if we kept up with this work. Our pastor shut him off and said, this is the work of the church. But how do you deal with that? So any advice that anyone here has when they see the old broad walking around and is trying to go into an all-white, mostly all-white parish and get it started, because until you win over people like that, we can't just work on the periphery. We've got to get the Staten Islands of the world to recognize systemic injustice because they recognize it face to face, but they think the laws that have changed are not.
Yeah.
So that's long diatribe was my question.
No, that's perfect. Just to summarize for the people who are on the live stream, we have this incredible woman who sounds like she's organizing her parish in Staten Island. She brought some of the good ones. So yeah, she's organizing in the hometown of Pete Davidson, Staten Island. And she's asking, how do we reach the people who understand that individual acts of racism are wrong and who are good-hearted people but don't see systemic racism, don't see it or don't recognize it as a problem?
Thank you for that question. And also, first of all, I'm so happy to hear about the work that you are doing in the space that you're in. And what the suggestion I have, and I get this question a lot because I think there are a lot of people who are rightfully frustrated by their parishes, their pastors, whatever, inability to actually grapple with this movement. And I think I'm just going to keep pointing back to creating intimate spaces, because I think what happens with people like the ones you're describing, something like this is not going to work for them, right? They're not going to react if you call them out in front of other people. They're not going to react if you show them all the evidence that you mentioned you showed them. But I think that is where the onus is on white Catholics in particular to say, okay, if I believe in building this liberatory space in our church, then I'm going to do the work of sitting with this person, even if it's hard, because these are difficult conversations to have. And this is not a difficult conversation that you're going to have once and then this person is going to be changed. These are difficult conversations that have to happen again and again. And an example I like to share with people is, I'm from the Dominican Republic. I'm from a place that is extremely anti-Black. And I have a lot of family members who, even though we are a Black country, are extremely anti-Black. And for me, I have had to have very difficult conversations with my loved ones about their anti-Blackness, about their commentary on the Haitian community. And so this is, and again, it is very overwhelming and it's disappointing to have those conversations. But the moments when it works best for me is when I sit in front of them and have a heart-to-heart, because I think we have to meet. The intimate spaces are where we can really meet people where they are, right? Where there is no fear of them being publicly, no fear of them being called out, even though I do think calling people out publicly, like the bishops, are a form of accountability. But I think in these particular cases, it's that intimate organizing again. I think it requires you, and it's a lot of work, right? It's a whole lot of work that white people have to do, but it's a lot harder work for the people of color who are in this church. So I just encourage you to keep having those intimate conversations and keep pushing them, right? Keep pushing them and say, hey, this is what the gospel says, and this is what you're actually showing that goes against the gospel, right? And even with something like when bishops say comments like what Gomez said, right? The language that he's using could very well be used to say, hey, this doesn't actually align with what Jesus calls us to do. So I think having those intimate conversations and just centering yourself in, I like to point especially to Pope Francis. I think Pope Francis gives us really, really great language to have these conversations, and just remembering that, like, we're all in this, right? If we're all Catholics, we're all in this community together, and I'm going to do the work of trying to change them. And honestly, you might not change them. There are going to be a lot of people who are just going to hold firm to their racism and they will never be changed. But I think it begins in your context, having those conversations in smaller spaces and having them consistently, right? Like, this is a consistent practice. Organizing as Catholics is a consistent practice. So that's what I recommend.
Thank you. Awesome.
First of all, thank you so much. Like, this has been great to listen to you guys exchange and talk and things like that. So my question, and then sort of the background comment for it. Question is, like, what should the in-group conversation look like within the church between Black bishops, Black priests, and the Black laity? And I say that because, like, in the 1980s, there was this letter, what we have seen and heard from the Black bishops to the Black laity, basically addressing, like, racism in the church. And that's an in-group conversation right there. It's like, we know what this is like. And there were only 10 of them at the time. I don't know how many there are right now. You know, it's not a perfect letter, but it was powerful. And so I feel very strongly that that sort of thing should happen again. but I would just like to hear like what should that in-group conversation again between the Black priesthood, Black bishops, and Black laity look like ideally?
Thank you. To summarize for those on the live stream, you just uplifted a space of conversation that happened in the 80s where the Black bishops wrote to the Black Catholic laity. So the question is, what should that conversation look like today?
Thank you for that question. I think it's a really, really important one, especially when we're talking about the space you mentioned. I think a lot of those conversations have to include the fact that there is a lot of ageism that exists in these spaces. There is a lot of ageism that exists when we're talking about, and specifically I'm going to keep it in the context in which you shared, there is a lot of ageism between the older Black bishops who have been in the church for a long time and have their own experience, but who are unwilling to kind of meet younger Black Catholics where they are. We know that a couple of years ago when Black bishops, clergy met with young people, young Black Catholics told them to take this movement seriously, and they told them to listen to what was happening with this movement and to help them think about this movement. And since then, it doesn't seem like this conversation has been ongoing. And I think we have to, whenever we talk about these spaces, we need to talk about the fact that it's an intergenerational space that has a lot of ageism that can exist both ways. And the conversations in those spaces need to say, okay, you are not just a Gen Z Catholic, you're not just a millennial Catholic who doesn't have an expertise, you have a lived experience that we actually need to honor, right? Like we need Black male clergy who can also have their own form of toxicity to the women in their life. They need to acknowledge that they also have privilege and they also have power, and they do not know necessarily what it's like, or not necessarily, they do not know what it's like to be a Black woman trying to exist in a Catholic space. And so these conversations, I think, need to first acknowledge that that's a very real reality. And second, again, it's still an intimate space that is still centered in love. And I think it needs to just be an honest conversation where especially young Catholics are allowed, young Black Catholics are allowed to say, hey, this is where I'm suffering. These are the things that actually matter to me. And those are the spaces where bishops really need to listen, right? Like all of these letters, or what it means to publish a letter collectively, or to publish a letter collective, or to publish individual letters, need to come from that space. I think that space in particular that you mentioned has to just be room where Black Catholic lay women in particular just share their pain, just share their suffering, but not just bishops to say, hey, we had a listening session and we listened. No. They need to listen in that space and say, okay, so we promise you that in 6 months, this is what we're gonna do, or in a year or whatever. They need to actually show that they're listening, and they need to show that they're doing the work, and they need to listen to us, because every time Black women in this church have this conversation, they come up with at least 5 solutions to make the church better, and no one is listening. So I think conversations like that need to first be rooted in the fact that there is this animosity toward lay Black women, and there's this animosity toward younger lay Black women in particular. And I think to make that space fruitful, we need to first acknowledge that and then actually listen, not just listen so that we can check off a box and say we listen, but listen and actually come up with action items. At least that's what I would love to see a space with between Black clergy and Black lay Catholics look like.
Thank you.
Yeah, listen.
It's always listen to Black women. That's
Always listen to Black women. Yeah, not just in their suffering, but in their like, here are the ends. We have time for one more question. Yeah, all the way in the back.
Yeah, so I worked for about 14 years for the Archdiocese of Los Angeles running the social justice office. And so I've seen the power that the church can have when it does lean in to issues such as the one we're talking about today. So it's particularly hurtful to hear what Archbishop Gomez has said. And I believe that social movements are incredibly important, and organizations like JUC, like other volunteer programs, where we're not perfect, where we're trying to understand how white supremacy and white racism show up in our organization, but that we're willing to at least lean into it to figure out what it is that we're doing. And what I told the JVs in the past is, you know, this is the church that we're trying to create here, with a group of people who are willing to take those steps, to lean in, and to challenge ourselves. And so just very grateful for the work that you're doing, and maybe just some comments on social movements that you do see that are really making a difference.
Yeah, I'm an FAB, so. To summarize very poorly, what you just said, you've seen the power that the church has when they lean into what I would say is discomfort and leaning into people suffering. So if you can comment on the power of social movements and maybe spaces where people have leaned into that, is that accurate? Okay.
And you mean spaces within the church where people have leaned into that?
Just social movements that you're particularly hopeful about.
Oh, okay. So I think I'm not as super plugged into all of the spaces like JVC. I was not a JVC myself, so I can't speak too much to that. But I think that is a space that is doing the work that I have mentioned tonight. That is a space where young people in particular are feeling empowered enough to go forward and actually try to change the world. And I think that is a space that we need to recreate more of in the church, because I think that the number one issue that I have felt as a person in this church, as a millennial person in this church, is that there isn't enough room to make young people feel empowered in that way. And so I think that is a space that does that really, really well. And I think, again, the Black Lives Matter movement, the Dream Defenders, the Sunrise movement, these are not church social movements, but these are social movements that are doing, again, the Christ-centered work that we're all ultimately trying to do. And what makes them so powerful is that they empower young people, because that is, again, a problem that I've encountered with myself, but with other young Catholics that I've talked to in the church. Young people do not feel empowered enough to do this work. This is really, really scary work, and we are clinging to these movements because they make us feel like we matter. And I think the church as a whole has to create more spaces where people, young people in particular, feel like we matter, because guess what? We matter outside of just being able to help people figure out how to use Excel or TikTok, right? It's not just, we're digital tools, like we actually have skill sets. And I think the church has to get better at creating spaces like many of the ones that have been mentioned here tonight, because we need that. And I think that, again, learning from these movements that are doing this work that we can literally copy and paste in the church and do better, that's kind of what I have about that.
For all the older people in the room, that was your digital tutorial for the night. Thank you, Olga, for this conversation. I just love to sit at your feet and listen to your wisdom. And thank you, all of you who are engaged in listening and asking questions, and who are going to be here throughout the teach-in. We are out of time, but
I can make an announcement.
What? Yeah.
For those of us who have to dash out quickly, will the book be on sale elsewhere?
Yeah, so the book will be on sale, not just at this table, but at the ISN store, or the teach-in store, whatever they're calling it, throughout the weekend.
And wherever books are sold.
Wherever books are sold is what Lena just told me. There are also these really cool Solidarity on Tap pint glasses for sale. I don't know if Lena, I'm talking over your announcements, but this is what she told me to promote. I've been drinking out it all night. It's very nice. And then to continue the conversation, Olga, where can we find you on socials?
You guys can find me on Twitter, where you can get all of the snarkiness that doesn't make it into my written pieces. So at Olga Segura, you guys can follow me there.
Sweet. Thanks. Enjoy the rest of your teach-in. Consider
I can wind it up. Keep going.
Consider who you want to listen to this weekend and what voices you want to center when you choose your breakouts.
Ooh, give a big round of applause for these wonderful women and their wisdom and the question asking, but mostly just for the space and the voices that you have and that you're lifting up, and just all of you. It's great. Thank you so much for being here. Thank you for everything that you have done in partnership with us. For those of you on the live stream, for those of you here, we still have plenty of time to shout out to each other in the chat. Also, please check out the opening of the Ignatian Family Teach-in for Justice via our live stream. The link will appear on the screen. Also, as mentioned, Solidarity on Tap classes, Olga's book, and other things are for sale or for pickup for swag. They're available online at our store. Sponsor. Thank you so much to our wonderful sponsor of Solidarity on Tap for this event was Ignatian Young Adult Ministries. You can learn about all of the wonderful things they do at ignatianyoungadultministries.org. It's really great. They're really cool. Lots of ministries that they do to engage these young people. So check it out. And I wouldn't be doing my job as Director of Development if I didn't say if you liked this evening, please donate to ISN via the link that pops up, via Venmo at Ignatian-Solidarity, via putting some money in my hand, or writing a check and sending it to our address, which can be found at igsol.net. Thank you so much. Another big round of applause. Drink the drinks, eat the food, give each other elbow fives, and stay safe and healthy, and listen to Black women. Amen. I hate that I ended that as a white woman.